This is the second video in a series on the impacts that we can expect from climate change. In this video, we'll talk about increases in extreme weather events. So more intense storms and floods, drought is going to be more often, more widespread and longer, and then changes in extreme temperatures. So extreme weather. This is difficult as weather is to predict, and there isn't a solid consensus on what will happen. The information that I'll give you is from the IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report. So in general, increasing ocean and land temperatures increase evaporation, and the warm air is going to hold more water. So what that means is that we'll have more water in the atmosphere at any given point. And when we have storms form, like hurricanes and monsoons, those are going to use that water that's in the atmosphere. So they can be more intense, longer, and kind of more devastating. This is from the IPCC 1.5C report. Human-induced global warming has already caused multiple observed changes in the climate system. They said this with high confidence. In particular, this includes increases in both land and ocean temperatures, as well as more frequent heat waves in most land regions. There's also high confidence that it has caused an increase in the frequency and duration of marine heat waves, so thinking about those moving hot blobs of water. Further, there's evidence that the global warming has led to an increase in the frequency, intensity, and/or amount of heavy precipitation events at global scale. This is medium confidence, as well as having increased the risk of drought in the Mediterranean region, and that's us. Looking at storms and floods, what will happen regarding storms and hurricanes is still speculative. However, the rising sea level will and already has increased the damage caused by storms on the coast. It's likely that the number of storms will decrease, but that the intensity will increase. And we've seen an increase in hurricane intensity. There isn't a kind of point in the scale to convey the intensity of hurricanes that people are experiencing now. I think it stops at Category 5, and then there's nothing beyond that, but the storms that we have been experiencing recently are way more intense than the Category 5 hurricanes that we were experiencing previously. A study based on more than 2 decades of satellite altimeter data, so that's measuring the height of the sea surface, showed that hurricanes intensify significantly faster now than they did 25 years ago. Specifically, researchers found that storms can attain Category 3 wind speeds nearly 9 hours faster than they did in the 1980s. Another satellite-based study found that the global wind speeds had increased by an average of 5% over the past 2 decades. So we have more water in the atmosphere. We have because of our warmer air, right? And because we have more evaporation of that water, and the water itself is warmer, so it will evaporate more readily. We can also have our sea levels rising and intruding further inland. So the sort of coastal area that maybe would have absorbed most of that impact is now just water, and those hurricanes can move further inland than they did before. Increased intensity of storms means that more of a region's precipitation will fall all at once and in only a portion of that region. So that's going to result in flooding in one place and possibly droughts in another. So if instead of having a milder storm that maybe moves and migrates around, we get this extreme storm, all that precipitation falls at once, it doesn't maybe move as far inland as it would have. It's difficult to say. It's going to be different for every region. But what we can expect are more extremes, basically. Drought is something that we here in California are pretty familiar with, and it's another one that we're getting conflicting results about how climate change will impact drought. In general, models show precipitation increasing at high latitudes and decreasing at low and mid latitudes, or in the mid-continent areas. In already dry areas that are expecting increased temperatures, think about Southern California, droughts will likely become more severe, as they already have here in the western United States. Additionally, more precipitation will fall as rain rather than snow. So what that means is that our snowpack is going to melt earlier. We're going to run out of snow earlier in the season, and the drier portion of the summer is going to be extended and intensified because our rivers won't be carrying that melted snow down to our kind of dry coastal Mediterranean areas. So that's how we sort of maintain a little bit of our cooler temperature, as well as our water availability in the summer, is from snowpack that's melting in the mountains being carried down through the rivers. And here we see our rivers dwindling already. A lot of that is due to agricultural extraction, particularly marijuana, pulling from our river systems. Also the growing of grapes, right? We can't put it all on illegal pot grows. A lot of that is going to growing of grapes throughout California, usually for wine, right? So thinking about how all of those agricultural industries will be impacted if we get increasingly less and less snowpack every year, adding to those rivers, and then how that impacts all of the organisms that depend on the river. I like to pull up these maps every year, so I keep my old maps. The first time I had it was in October of 2017, and there was a pretty extreme drought happening in Montana and South Dakota, and a little bit here in Southern California. If we look at the next year, same month, we get an expansion of that drought in the western states. Oregon's pretty rough there, Four Corners area is intense, and Southern California is pretty intense. But it's sort of cleared up in our Montana and Dakota area. If we look at the next year in November, so a little bit later, we see that we had a pretty wet year overall in the US. So a lot of those areas rebounded from drought. It's mostly focused around the Four Corners. This I just got from today, but it's from a week ago. For 2020, so we are in the middle of a kind of mild drought right now. Texas is experiencing more of a drought, but here in our little coastal area, we know it didn't rain very much this winter, and it's not raining very much this spring so far. The rivers are low, and we are approaching the dry season, right? Because we have Mediterranean summers. So this drought is probably going to increase. Overall, we can expect extreme temperatures, so extreme colds and extreme hot, particularly these extreme heat waves. So the number of heat waves has been increasing in recent years. They plot these excessively hot days, and then you see how many excessively hot days you have every year, and that number is increasing in most areas. The Arctic region in particular is predicted to experience the most extreme changes in temperature and has already warmed more than any other region on Earth. So this is an average temperature from 1960 to 2011 change, and most of that change has happened in the Arctic, right? And so we see all of our areas that would have our boreal forest, that huge biome, are all experiencing fairly extreme warming. And I looked at a picture of the temperature anomalies for this month, and it's all just focused around a huge heating event in basically all of Eastern Europe and Russia.